Hello, Megan.
Hello.
Good to see
Perfect. Good to see you as well.
you in a while. I have to always apologize to Elsa that I can never find the right sequence of things to click. So there we are.
We got it. That's what
Well,
matters.
yeah. Well, in any case, welcome to this wonderful format called Mission Executive, where we've now actually done for several years interviews about leadership and business with leaders of different kinds. So I'm very, very happy that were able to welcome you as well. For those that are connecting for the first time, this is one tiny part of what the Novatore Club can offer you, which is actually to listen to conversations of different kinds. This is all recorded and it will be publicized later for members to see as is. If you have any questions, those of you that are connected, you can ask questions in the chat in the chat column, and I'll share them then with Megan. Megan Riley, you are a mom of two kids, I understand, a boy and a girl. You're really a cosmopolitan, clearly American. Oh, I don't know if it's clearly, but you're American born. Originally from California, a country unto its own, actually, on the North American continent in many ways, who has studied in Spain. Where in Spain?
I was in Granada. I lived in Granada.
Oh,
In the
ay,
south.
ay, 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 ay.
hmm
But then having lived and worked clearly in Seattle, Paris, and now for over 10 years in Estonia, and as it was pointed out to me, even with a house in Saaremaa, which
hmm
also says a lot about your view of Estonia as far as at least I'm concerned. On the other hand, this is sort of the global or the geographic uh, journey that you've had, but you're also a former Microsoft leader in a male-dominated environment, which has inspired you to advocate for women. We'll come back to that because I met several different kinds of women, actually, mainly from the Microsoft world. And at AmCham Estonia, you not only serve on the AmCham board, but you lead the Women in Leadership initiative, which is similar to Novatore, but different at the very same time. And the second half of this, our dialogue, I'll get back to it a little bit. But most importantly, you are a founding of your own coaching expertise company for the tech industry called MLR Strategies. So welcome. Question: do you remember when and why you made your professional choice to be in the tech world, which is clearly the
Oh.
first sort of
hmm
decision you take professionally?
Yeah. I first of all, thank you so much for inviting me on to this into this discussion. I'm really happy to be here and to be back with you, Baiba. Yes, I do actually. My degree was uh, was in linguistics and literature. So I did Spanish and French, linguistics and
Okay.
literature, which, my parents were pretty sure that I was going to end up unemployed or doing field work someplace, deep in Latin America, which actually would have been a dream. But actually at the time, which was the late when I graduated, which was the late 90s, that's how old I am. Microsoft, Bill Gates in particular, was building this. I would say like the largest and deepest team of computational linguists in the world. Actually, even including kind of research organizations, because he had this vision about natural interface, a way of naturally interfacing with computers. And so I was a Spanish linguist. They were looking to build a team of Spanish linguists. And that is how I joined Microsoft. I did not join, from a programming background. I joined, exactly in this kind of liberal arts space that I loved. And then it just turned out that I had a knack for learning what I needed to learn from an engineering side, and my scope just kept growing. But what
So
I love
what did
about
you
that,
do?
Yeah,
I mean, what did you do as a linguist in the beginning from
yeah.
Spanish to tech?
We worked on the first version of the Spanish grammar checker. So if you think about using Word,
Okay.
the red squiggles and the green squiggles, and for a while we had blue squiggles, that's all part of this, what was called the natural language group. They did this. So they developed
Okay.
grammar checkers and etc. But actually it's the foundation for what we are using today in
Yeah.
ChatGPT, OpenAI, the
Yeah.
foundation for everything. So that's where my journey started. I stayed in that organization, in that particular organization for 10 years. I started working on one product in one language. And by the time I left, we had scaled up to, I was then managing an organization that covered uh, 15 languages and 75 products. So it was just a huge exponential scale when we saw what we could do with that technology. We incorporated speech, and we took the engineering to another level, which was really exciting.
But what were you usually coming from the language or the linguistic side, and you all were compelled ultimately to understand how the technology works? How did this work?
Yeah, there is a field called computational linguistics, which
Hmm.
basically takes a background in linguistics and the computational aspect, the engineering aspect, and puts them together, because the way that we interface, you know, I mean, every computer programmer is using a programming language, right? And so the idea with
Sure.
computational linguistics was to apply, a natural language kind of process to interfacing with as engineers. And so we had a strictly engineering team, and then we had a team of computational linguists. And by the time I left, I just learned everything I needed to learn to continue, because I didn't know
Wow.
the first thing about computers actually when I joined Microsoft, which is embarrassing to say now, but at the time it wasn't
No.
uncommon. And by the time I left that organization, I still had another 7 years left in the company. I went all over, but I understood that I worked really well in that space. I worked really well in kind of the chaos and startup-y
Hmm.
scenario when everything is kind of new and first version. And I really enjoyed the fast pace and hard problems that we were trying to solve at that time. So it was a good fit.
So you spent quite a long time at Microsoft, and now
Hmm.
you're in Estonia. What
Hmm.
are the, let's say, two or three different crossroads that you faced, if at all, on this journey?
That's such a great question. I was trying to reflect, sometimes, you think about like, what are the inflection points that were most important to bring you to where
Hmm.
you are today? And actually, I think the first one for me is when I finished my time with the natural language group, which is where I had started. I really had to decide if I was a linguist or if I was an engineer, or if I wanted to stay as a tech leader or if I wanted to go back to my roots. And I decided I wanted to move to Paris, and went to dinner with a colleague and mentioned it to him. And he said, "Oh, do you know, we just acquired a company in Paris and they need exactly your skills, because they need to build the team from scratch. And, they
Wow,
need to, yeah, we had just acquired as a
that's
company a small
divine
startup."
intervention.
Exactly. And I think for me, that was a really key moment, because I had just bought a loft. I had my dog, my life was super good. And I was like, well, all right, let's throw it all in the air and move to Paris and see what happens, which was really wonderful, and like a very humbling experience to learn how to do everything new in a new country. I had done it before when I was a student, but when you
Hmm.
do it as a grown up, you don't have a lot of those safeguards in place. So that was an amazing experience, and I built a team, and again, I took over a larger leadership role. They're doing construction on my building. I hope that you cannot hear that.
No.
Um, and yeah, and so it was a really great experience. So that was, I would say, that was really the first one. Uh, the second one came when I was about 15, 16 years into my time at Microsoft. And
Hmm.
it was the end of 2014. And I've spoken about this before. I think I even spoke about it at Novatore Summit last year. That we had a new CEO, Satya Nadella, who was brand new, very green in his role. And he went to this Grace Hopper's conference. which is a conference for women in engineering. And he went on stage. And at this point, I had been in the company for 16, 17 years. I had been a manager for all but like 10 months of my time there. My organizations were getting bigger and bigger. And, you know, as a woman in tech, especially in the 90s and the aughts, it was like, it wasn't all, sunshine and rainbows, but it was still worthwhile. But he got on stage, and a woman in the audience asked him, she asked, what would you recommend to us women who are looking to get promoted? Because as we know, women don't get promoted the same way that men do. And Satya, because he was very green and had not had yet all the PR training he would eventually have, said, well, in my experience, if you have to ask for it, you don't deserve it. And it was like he set off a bomb in the room, because every woman who has grown up in a male-dominated industry knows that you don't get anything just by being a good soldier. You have to ask for it. You have to ask for it in a particular way. You have to ask for it with a smile on your face. And so that was really the moment when, after, kind of 17 years of leadership in this company, I thought, okay, I really need to do something else. Actually, it's not a reaction. It's a response. But I felt already that my time was coming to an end. I didn't know what I wanted to do next, but it felt like, if the universe was going to give me a big neon sign, that was the one it was going to be. And so I moved out of tech. My partner at the time, actually, he's still my partner today. He had an opportunity to come. He was also a Microsoft employee and had an opportunity to come and lead the engineering organization here for Skype. And we were trying to have our second child, and it was like, okay, now's a good time to make a transition. Everything is coming together.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. But maybe clearly you wouldn't do anything very differently today, as far as
I don't think I would change anything. I think, yeah.
If you talk about Microsoft as a male-dominated company, if not in a male-dominated industry, which it clearly is, can you describe what it's like? I mean, I've lived almost my entire professional life in male-dominated industries, automotive, telecoms, infrastructure, and there's a certain type of way of doing things. For example, between employees, what you talk about, how I think the promotion aspect is most of the time in very large companies very similar, between asking for it and being the good soldier. But what is how would you describe the environment in tech?
I think I got very lucky that I entered tech in a kind of liberal arts space. I cannot speak for people who jump right into, like deep engineering organizations. But I think that the higher I went, the more I understood that I had to push harder to open doors. Something about being, lower level, it was like non-threatening, I could do things my way, I could make changes. And what I really understood was that, like, being a woman, whether it's because, we're socialized that way, or because, we have it in us innately, I can't say, we approach things differently. Like, the research bears this out, right? Women, tend to promote from within, tend to invest in research and development. Men tend to focus on acquisitions. And so I think that, figuring out, as a woman, I felt like it was always how to continue to do what I knew I did best, in an environment that was telling me constantly that my way was the wrong way to do it. And yet, every time I did it, I was successful and I got rewarded for it. And I think, navigating those waters is this, like, ability to kind of find your own path and believe in your own path, even when the people around you might be saying, this is not the right way to do it. Is for me what I really felt in those days. And, I would still say is true. I went in-house with an e-commerce company a couple of years ago as the country manager, and I still felt that even though it was, 5 years later, it's still the same in tech, right? one way to do things. We talk about doing it different ways, but if you want to approach it differently, there's a lot of healthy skepticism. And so I think it was, that, and, I think now a lot of things that we wouldn't accept anymore as women, and I think young women are not accepting in the workplace. I don't know how it was for you, Baiba, but I think for us at the time, that really wasn't an option. If you wanted to get a seat at the table, you had to kind of laugh sometimes at the jokes that you didn't agree with, or you
Sure.
had to, let things roll off your back that maybe I wouldn't let roll off my back anymore now at the age of 51, but for sure at 25, if I wanted a seat at the table and I wanted to be able to bring more women to the table, there was like a balancing act you had to pay.
I'd say that when I was, in my plus minus 30s in the automotive world, the very first thing I learned was to be very well versed in sports. I hate sports. I'm about as uninterested in sports as it gets. And this was in Europe, so soccer was very important. So, instead of reading the stuff in the newspaper, those days you had newspapers, that you would look at, it would be really to get to know the sports page, to be able to even be on the same page, make jokes, talk about whatever, because sports was the language of the males in the business area, and played also a very large role, uh, frankly, in selling cars, let alone anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's, and the other one is actually listening to a whole bunch of stupid remarks and not
Yeah.
opposing them. I would
Mm-hmm.
add to those listening, though, when you are of a certain age, and you are certainly in the very beginning of it right now, Megan, there's a point where men don't take older women seriously anyways, so you can talk back. And there is do it in a charming way, but it doesn't hurt you that much professionally or impede anything professionally. And since you are no longer perceived even subliminally as a sex object at a certain age or over a certain age, there's a different dialogue that then ensues. But that may be for another
So
session at some
interesting.
point. But it's just very different. And now I am of an age where I can really say whatever I like.
Yeah.
Mainly because you're in a position where you don't really need to prove anything to anybody anymore. And women who are of a certain professional stature, I would claim, be interesting to see how you see it, that feel very strong, or that they've already achieved an awful lot, they feel much easier with, or at greater ease of claiming things, changing things, moving things around. And at the end of the day, all of this is about leadership, actually, whether male or female. Do you have the tools, ability, chutzpah, know-how, motivation in leadership? And our mission, of course, is to get simply more women into leadership positions, especially in business, because in the Baltic, women are certainly very dominant in all kinds of areas, and in business in a way too, but not really at the very, very top, which is, of course, also proven by statistics. So tell me, you clearly work with leaders and you train leaders. What do you think leadership really entails?
I think, I think it's like many other things, that there's not one set of, there's not one mix of skills that is a silver bullet to, to make you a good leader. I think the most important, from my perspective, the healthiest leaders are the leaders who have a lot of curiosity. So curiosity about, the industry that they work in, curiosity around, what's happening industry adjacent to them, what the future disruptions might be, but also curiosity about themselves and the people on their team. So I think that the healthiest leaders are the ones who are not focused only on the outcomes, but are also focused on how to get to the outcomes as much as possible with the people that they have. This is something that I really value in the people that I work with, and I'm at a point in my life where I only have to work with clients that I enjoy working with, and for me, one of the most important things is, that you have the goal, even if you don't know how to do it yet, even if you don't have a lot of emotional intelligence, that you at least understand the value of the people that you're working with, and how you can use, people's natural interests to drive competitive advantage. So I think for leaders, this being curious is really key. And also being humble. I think, we have a lot of examples of leaders who always want to be the loudest in the room, who want to have the last word, who, hire really smart people and then just ask them to align behind whatever their vision is. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity. I think the best leaders are humble and hire people who are smarter than them or smarter in different ways, and then let them give their opinion, and their opinion should actually matter. I used to tell my team, like anecdotally, that if you're saying yes to me, you're not going to do well. I want you to say no to me. No, and here's what we should do instead, because that's the reason that you hire smart people. So I think that those two things, really make a difference nowadays. Of course, you have to be driven, you have to, want to get results, you have to be able to speak. But I think really this thing about being curious, and being humble enough to learn from the smart people around you is really a huge differentiator for leaders. And I think it's something
I think
women know how to do quite well, actually.
yeah, I think that's a very interesting observation. Curiosity and humility, as sort of key values or key players uh, in a leadership package. I know that humility, or I experienced that humility became a bit of a topic when the Canadians elected their new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, at the beginning of May 2025. And in his speech upon winning, he talked about humility, about being humble in the position also towards the general public and the voters specifically. Now, I'm Canadian. Many Canadians, are perceived as being humble by nature, which of course is completely untrue. But I also lived for a very long time in Norway, and sort of the Norwegian mindset is one that is focused on humility. And I remember when I worked many moons ago for Statoil and Equinor, how the CEO would always come up with all kinds of statements to say, but let us remain humble, in face of whatever it was that it was in face of. And I think it'll be and what I find very interesting and intriguing is that usually leaders who are extremely successful, also usually intellectually very smart, or smarter than the average United States president, uh, are the ones who will talk most about being humble and seek to be as humble as they can possibly be, though it's usually very difficult to hide the excellence of their own people. But that's a very interesting one. But
Mm-hmm.
tell me, I mean, I don't think I have ever looked at a candidate and tried to evaluate humility. I have to remember that one. Curiosity, yes. But you clearly also talk to a lot of people that seek new leaders somewhere. What do you think employers look for exactly in our region? What are they seeking for leaders? And is it any different from anywhere else in Europe?
Yeah, I think that in my experience so far in Estonia, and to a certain extent in the Baltics, I still think that we are a little bit behind in terms of how we think of leaders. I think it's changing, but I still have this I have this feeling that we still, leaders need to be strong. I think in Estonia as well, this is, leaders are typically male. It might be that everyone immediately underneath the leader is female in supporting the work and doing the hard work, but still there's this perception of the CEO sets the vision and then goes out and shakes hands, right? And everyone else gets the work done quietly with their head down. And I think it's obviously not that way completely, but I still see quite a lot of that here. I think that happens also in the US, but I think that, I think in the US you're also more likely to see people who are, really changing
Mhm.
that dynamic. I think we see it played out as well in, in the pay gap, and, the lack of movement, I would say. I think we could do a lot better in using our voices as women. But I think from a leadership perspective, I think it's still quite old school. I think I feel it's moving in the right direction. I would say, in the right direction from my perspective, since in the 10 years that I have been here. But still, I think it's very closed. It's very tight knit communities. They know each other. It's like there's one way of doing things. Let's not rock the boat. And I think, that's not where the magic happens. The magic happens when you bring something completely new, a different way of doing things from outside, and even you just add a drop of that magic and it changes the dynamic of the org, right? All it takes is one new person in a leadership team to really change the dynamic entirely. So yeah, so I think I would love to see the Baltics try to apply the same approach to leadership as they've applied, as you've applied to, startup environments and tech. I mean, it's a really exciting place to be to be a startup founder, because you're breaking ideas all the time and starting new things. And I think applying that generally to having a little bit of that faith that would work even at a larger scale would be a really great thing. And I do think it's different. I mean, of course, I have worked in France, I've worked in Spain, I have clients in the UK, I have clients in other places, but I think, if we're talking about what we can do here with, Novatore and the women in this room and how we can move things forward, I would say, let's not be afraid to experiment with leadership as well. Try something new, switch it up, make it more modern, create the world you want. It sounds very, euphemistic, but create the environment that you would want to work in.
What do you describe as more modern leadership?
I would say more modern leadership is exactly this leadership that we've been talking about, which is, not just focused on the bottom line, focused on how to get to the bottom line with the people that you have, you know, mm, this kind of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. It's not about, I hired you because you have this skill, sit in your office and do it all day, and I'm going to send you the plan. It's like, I hired you because you're smart. Let's all learn together. All businesses have a disruption at one point or another, and the healthiest organizations are the ones that have already built this resilience in, because they have this, they have in their DNA this kind of commitment to learning, commitment to growth, commitment to taking input, even if it's critical input, from other places. And I think this is really a core component of modern leadership, along with uh, diversity and emotional intelligence. And I know that is not where we are. We have, as I said, strong headwinds against diversity and emotional intelligence these days, but actually it works, and the data bears it out. So modern
Hmm.
leadership is a more humane approach to business, I would say.
From the ones online right now, Lima Ziedinga sends you a big thank you and
Hi,
smiles
Lima.
and all kinds of rockets popping. But it would be very interesting to hear what, uh, from those here that are listening in the chat room, what you think modern leadership is. Because I must admit, I think that is to a large extent wishful thinking. That's sort of one of them. I have, in the last 2 months, been part of, in a way of seeking, where people seek new leaders or different organizational forms, or trying to define what you seek from top level leaders, and the bottom line will never go away. That sort of will never go
Hmm.
away. And when, probably rightly so, even if the bottom line may be red at times, but it's a question of how do we work around the numbers, and very many women will align with that as well. But I think
Hmm.
that if you would take it as a basis, sort of that is sort of the almost hygiene that let us agree that we need to somehow get to the bottom line. The
Of
real
course.
question is, what are the other qualities that we're looking for, and also what are the other professional qualities that we may be looking for. Inessa writes, adding to humility the ability to listen and hear without being loud. I think that's very, listening is a pretty good quality in all of this quite well. But I think the issue around bubbles, all three bolts have bubbles of their own. First of all, within their own nationalities, they really don't like the neighbors very much, that want to breach, certainly don't want them in leadership positions. If you know, in whichever conversations, and have a really hard time embracing somebody that's very different. And it doesn't matter whether it's female or male, but somebody who comes in with a very different approach and attitude to things. But you know, but I think that is very cultural, very societal. And I actually find it very surprising to hear in Estonia, where I always think that people are more open and whatever, but I guess it'll still take a while, whichever way we look at it. Most of the time in Novatore, we're dealing with people who are in smaller or larger corporate environments, so large companies. And I know that we talk a lot about the C-suite, the corporate suite, but I don't think very many people have actually really experienced it in a significant fashion, like you have maybe with Microsoft and I have with different other companies. What do you know, if I take a look at how corporations work and what corporate roles are seen to be at the very top, do you think that they're the same for any leadership role? In other words, CEO, CFO, CIO, whatever, are they the same?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because I do think that when you get to the place where you can, you know, you have a lot of managerial experience or the ability to manage, yeah, to manage organizations and, you know, drive for results and etc. You can kind of apply that to anything. I don't know at the C-suite level if I would fully agree. I mean, for example, I think that, you know, anyone who uh I think, for example, I would never step into a CFO role. I don't love accounting.
Yeah,
I've never
sure.
loved accounting. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's very specific. But I do think that, you know, once you get to a particular level and you are a learner and you know how things work, you know, you can easily move, for example, rather than into different roles, but, you know, in different industries. For example, I've seen a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
transition, and I think what you have to look at is, you know, what is your what kind of organization is the right organizational fit for you? Do you like fast paced? Do you like slow paced? You know, do you like, you know, decision by committee? Do you like, you know, to be able to be the lone wolf? You know, and then also the values of the organization, right? I think by the time you reach that level, you have, as you know, you have some indication for yourself about the kind of organization that you want to be a part of. And so it becomes maybe less of, I mean, I think, you know, I would never apply for a CFO role. I could apply for a CTO role or a COO or CEO. But for me, then what I would look for is, you know, am I interested in the work they do? Do I like the values of the organization? And is the pace of the organization allowing me to do my best work? You know, I think those are the key. But I think, of course, once you have this kind of management board perspective, you know, you can just apply your perspective, whether it's, you know, whether it's e-commerce or, I don't know,
Yeah.
making footballs or, you know, whatever it happens to be. I think it's, you know, you're one of the, I think, most important skills of a leader is this ability to take on new information, right? And whether you do it quickly or slowly, that's, you know, that's again about the pace of the organization. But if you can take on new information, you can learn whatever you need to learn. So
Mm-hmm. I what I have learned is that there are two positions in the C-suite where you really do need some professional experience before you're even considered, and that's probably apart from all the leadership experience, and that is CFO, and the other one is CIO. So Chief Information Officer or Chief Financial Officer, that there is an assumption that you know something about finance or about, you know, tech in some way. Lima says, in my opinion, modern leadership is mutual trust. That team performs in the best intention and efficiency they are able to, and the leader does the best possible or gives the best possible guidance and communicates the vision, collaboration, and trust. I think that's very, very smart and actually very true. But let me paint you a fun picture. I was at a very large private equities company's annual event, and they were talking about, they were bringing out examples of how with the kind of supervisory board members they had put in, they had made great transformations in the management board. And one of the most fun actually was from a woman who had one of the summits, Luisa Delgado, who took over, who went onto the supervisory board of a huge family initially, and I think still family-owned toy company in Germany called Schleich. And Schleich makes these little figures from dinosaurs to animals, and you know, many kids would know exactly what it is, but it was a company that actually at one point was in deep trouble because kids, you know, weren't even that much into those kinds of toys anymore, and it was about, you know, how do we give this toy brand and also the products a very different flavor and touch. So in this panel discussion, you had a bunch of men in suits and cashmere sweaters talking about, you know, transformation, all this, and suddenly they invite one of the new management members of Schleich, and on comes this 30-something, slightly paunchy in rugged jeans and God knows what kind of a t-shirt and curly hair all over the place, sits down, sits his back, and, you know, told everybody what the world looked like to him. And he was a guy who had done quite a lot, came from tech. He had done quite a lot of different companies, and he was brought in to really shake up that toy universe. And by Jove, he did. It was really interesting. And I asked Louisa later, so how did this work with the CEO? Well, first of all, it was the supervisory board that decided that there needed to be some serious disruption of some kind, and that actually the target audience works with technology, which didn't seem logical for tiny little toys that little kids use, and they've done astonishing things in the meantime. So leadership can take on very unusual forms at times, I would say.
Absolutely. And so much of leadership is about being able to understand the transferable skills you have to be able to move from one industry to the other. I mean, and I think, you know, one thing that tech does really well, whether we love it or not, is they are disruptive. They have a different approach to solving problems. And so that's a great example of how, you know, you can say, look, I don't know anything about the toy business, but what I know is, you know, how to look at a problem from a completely different perspective and break it down and try something new, right? And that's a great example of transferable skills, which we all have, and we don't focus on them enough.
Totally. But I mean, the nice thing is 2 years later, when I met him, he had already been taken on some characteristics of your average or more average leader in that kind of an environment. It's really amusing to see. But he had already changed 2 companies in their trajectory. Tell me, when we talk about modern leadership or positive leadership, what kind of person should not aspire to management, top management?
To top management. Again, I think it really depends on the role. But if we think about a role like a CEO or, you know, a COO or anything where you are setting vision and, you know, figuring out how to get there, I think, you know, in general, I think if you don't like people, you shouldn't be there, Because,
Yeah.
you know, when I started to work at
Agreed.
Microsoft, one of the things that Bill Gates used to say was, you know, our most important resource is our people. And I think that there is so much truth in that. It's such a simple thing to say,
Yeah,
you know, but it
it's
doesn't
true.
matter, you know, how much you have in the bank. It doesn't, and none of those things matter. What matters the most is the people that you have. So I think that if you're someone who wants to, you know, set vision, you know, you don't have to be the most natural communicator. There are coaches for everything nowadays, right? But I think that you have to care. You have to care about connecting. So if
Mhm.
you know, if you don't have that skill or that's not what you want to do, I would say there are certain C-suite roles that should not be open to you if you want the company to be successful. And I have seen many startups with brilliant ideas lose their talent because the CEOs just couldn't care less about the people working for them. So I think that's the
Okay.
quickest way to brain drain.
Hmm.
Um, and other than that, I would say, you know, I think people, if you're not willing to make hard decisions, then, you know, top management is not for you. Sometimes, you
That's
know,
true.
the only choices you have are ugly choices. And you have to
Yeah.
be able to make those decisions, and you have to be able to put those decisions into a context that, you know, that the rest of the organization can understand. And if you're not willing to take that hit and own that, then management is not for you. You
Yeah.
know, that's just the truth of doing business. Of course, we're talking about taking care of your people, etc. But sometimes, you know, sometimes there isn't another decision except for the one that feels the most painful in the moment. But, you know, not making the decision is much more costly for everyone involved. And so I think, you know, you have to be really willing to make those hard decisions and live with the consequences and know that the buck stops with you, actually, that, you know, you're the
Yeah.
one who has to take responsibility for it.
That's the hardest thing to learn, or at least when you face it once, and then you know whether you have the mettle or not.
Exactly.
Do you do you think women lead differently than men generally? One should never generalize, but generally.
Yeah. Yeah, one should never generalize, but I do think that we have skills, you know, again, whether we have been kind of pushed into those skills societally or not, we have a different range of skills sometimes than men do. And I think that, you know, some of the things that we you know, that we grow up being, you know, rewarded for, like taking care of other people and etc. Those, you know, those can be really a superpower at work. I mean, I have a funny story about this.
Mm.
For much of my career, I was told, "Great work, but probably this is the last year for you." You know, because you're too focused, you know, on building a team. You know, sometimes we just have to let people go. You're too focused on
No.
figuring out how to keep the team. You know, you're not focused enough on the engineering. And I every year looked around and thought, I have a million engineers around me. You know, not one of them knows how to have a meaningful conversation with the people around them. I'm just going to keep doing what I think is right. Maybe they're going to fire me, maybe they're not. And every year I would get promoted. And every year with the promotion, it was, okay, good job, but probably this is the last year for you. Until finally I thought, okay, I'm just, you know, obviously what
This
I'm
is the
doing is
last
working.
year.
Exactly, exactly. But I think that's a great example of, you know,
Yeah.
I was the only woman I was the only woman leader for much of my career at the level that I was at in my immediate organization, and I think it just was a great example of how, you know, I like to joke that, you know, nobody knew what emotional intelligence was, or nobody valued women's emotional intelligence until Daniel Goleman, who is a man, wrote a book about it, and then suddenly it was like, okay, emotional intelligence is a thing. We have a lot of skills that I think are really superpowers on the job, and you know, the more we lean into those and not try to hide them, you know, I think the better women can do. Of course, you have to also dot your i's and cross your t's. You have to drive for results. You have to be willing to make the hard calls. But, you know, if you lean into the things that you naturally do, which as women we
Mhm.
tend to also understand soft skills a bit better, you know, then yeah, I think it's a superpower. Not to generalize, of
Tell,
course, but yeah.
yeah. If I look at your different interviews online, you talk a lot about talent and finding your talent.
Mhm.
What is it? Is that difficult?
I think it's difficult only because we tend to not see the things that are easy for us. So if something comes very easy to us, we don't identify that as a talent. We think everybody's good at it. And so
Yeah.
it can be very hard to understand, what exactly is your specific set of talents that creates your unique value add to a situation. And I think it's not, once you learn how to identify them, I think it's not tricky, because it's like, oh, it's like oxygen, it's like breathing. If you're in a role that doesn't play to your strengths, it's hard every day. You wake up, you're
Yeah.
exhausted, the person sitting next to you is getting ahead, because it's in their wheelhouse. But when you're in a role that is like the right role for you and it's playing to your strengths, you were just like, it's the right place, it's the right pace, it's the right, everything snaps, right? Everything falls into position. And so I think the hardest thing sometimes is to figure out what those things are, and not not to let humility get in the way. Like we talked about humility being an important aspect, right? But I think as women, and I think in Eastern Europe, or at least anywhere outside of the US actually, we're not used to saying, oh, I'm really good at this. We're like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
not so bad. We have to stop that. We have to own what we're good at. There are a million things that I am not good at in this world, but there are some things that I am very, very good at, and it's okay to own that. And the sooner you own it, the more quickly you're going to fall into the right positions for yourself, I would say.
How do you think you find out what you're good at? What is the best tool to
Hmm.
find that?
Yeah, I do a lot of this kind of work with my clients. So one very simple thing is just to ask yourself, when do I lose myself? When do I lose time? What am I doing in
Okay.
those moments when time flies quickly? Or a second thing is, what do people come to me for? Sometimes we
That's a
can't,
good one.
yeah. So, maybe
That's a
you don't,
really good one.
you can't say it for yourself, but you know that everyone comes to you to ask, how to fix how to fix their problems. Even that in and of itself means that you know how to troubleshoot. So those are two really easy things that you can ask yourself just to get started. And then I have lots of other tools for this. I think it's really important to track what gives you energy and what doesn't give you energy, this kind of thing. I think it's really about making time for self-reflection, which we
MLR
don't always do.
Strategies
Hmm.
will help you find your
Thank you.
talent. There you
Yes,
go.
exactly.
Tell me, do you think there is actually such a thing as work-life balance? I get this
Uh,
question all the time.
yeah, I do too. I have given up on this notion of work-life balance, not because I think it's not possible, but because I think actually it's the wrong question. Because
So what's the
balance,
right question?
I think the right question is, what things give you energy and how do you make sure to protect those things in your schedule? So one thing that I think, is problematic with work-life balance is, it works, to be fair, like it works for men who have wives at home taking care of a lot of things. But for women who
Yeah.
are juggling work and kids or elderly parents or even just your dog, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think, you know, we are looking for this golden balance, but actually it can vary from one week to the next. Like what I thought was work-life balance last week was different this week because I have a massive cold. So, my bar is much lower for the work I have to get done. But I think it's really about what I have seen work much better is, when you take the time to reflect on what gives you energy. Maybe it's, having 10 minutes to yourself in the morning where you can just close your eyes and breathe or meditate or, write in your journal. And then, again, 5 minutes at the end of the day to close everything down and feel like you're leaving things behind. I mean, these little moments of things that protect your energy, I think can go a long way to making you feel in balance. Because if you know what those things are and you put a hard boundary around them, then maybe it doesn't matter that, your boss is asking you for a report at the last minute because, you have the energy to do it because last night you left early because your kid had a play at school or
Yeah.
because you wanted to have dinner with a friend. It doesn't really matter. So I think it's much more about managing your energy and knowing what gives you energy and and knowing what your triggers are and when you're feeling like you're hitting your wall with energy.
Okay. Two. I have two completely different questions from a slightly different area. I have one. leader. Are you still there? I'm on. Okay, right. Just lost the picture for a second. I have one leader who asked me what, who really wanted to know about interacting as a CEO with NGOs, especially with chambers of commerce and the like. And you are both an Estonian Chamber of Commerce as well as the Tallinn European School, or the chair of the Tallinn European School, which I find a very interesting thing in its own right, but we won't talk about it now. Why engage in that? Where do you see the value of engaging with different kinds of NGOs, especially, let's say, business NGOs?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So I was on the board of the chamber for 5 years, and I served as the president last year. And for me, one of the great things about the chamber was, and NGOs in general actually, is that I feel that if you find an NGO that's aligned with what you do, it is a good way to give back. For me, I really felt like, I care. For example, I got into the AmCham because the CEO of the local chamber, Daria Sivobol, found me at an event. I was an American woman, at a professional event. Who are you? So few Americans in Estonia, and brought me in. But I very quickly, I really appreciate what the chambers of commerce are trying to do, right? Which is to create positive impact locally, and to bring people, to bring companies together to be able to do that. So, for me, it was a great opportunity to participate in things like the Talent and Education Committee. To see, last year we had a language reform that meant that, the international teachers had a really high bar if they wanted to stay in the country, which was going to impact negatively the business environment. And it was, it was a fire drill. And so I was able, because I was, both on the school side and also on the business side, I was able to bring the community business leaders together to write a letter petitioning the ministry, to slow down and take a different approach. So I think it's just a way to give back, and also to, frankly, to protect, our own business interests. So I quite like that. It feels like a very obvious way to continue to invest in a community that has given so much to me. I can't vote.
Sure.
I pay my taxes, but then the other best way is, is to participate in trying to improve society in general.
I would add to that, it's a good place to network always.
Yes.
You find,
also,
new things. Do you speak Estonian?
I speak a very little Estonian. When I moved here, I was pregnant and I had an amazing teacher. But then when I had my daughter, like, that was it.
Yeah,
I
no
didn't
more
have
times.
a lot of time. Yeah, exactly. But also the
Hard
level of
language.
English is so high here, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, as a linguist,
Okay.
I loved it. I felt like my brain was working, but the level of English is so high. To be honest, it's slower for everyone if I'm trying to speak Estonian. But I still do. Yeah, I still try.
We are gradually coming to the end of this
Yes.
hour. Tell me, does the Novatore movement mean anything to you personally?
I think it's an amazing movement, and I think it does. I only really found out about the Novatore organization when we were preparing for last year's summit, because I was invited to come and give a workshop. But I love that it's an environment focused on women, but on women and business, really, and on women's empowerment, economic empowerment, business empowerment. And I think that it's really important. But what I like about Novatore is that it's also in some ways, it's very feminine, right? It's not, sometimes I think with these organizations, it can be very tech focused, or very, just get the work, we tend to close off this kind of feminine side of ourselves. One of the things I loved about the summit was, like, of course, I'm also coming from tech, right? But what I love about the summit was, like, everyone just came as themselves, right? It's like, you don't have to be a particular way. You can just come and you're part of this amazing community that connects leaders and connects people in mentorship relationships and gives opportunity for learning. And I think I would love to see Novatore expand to the other to the other two Baltics, frankly. I'd love to have a local chapter as well.
We would like to expand as well. That takes good cooperation and partners in all of this. Final question that we ask everybody that comes sort of online here, and that is, what are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to our club members that seek to strengthen their own leadership journey? Can
Yes,
also
I
be
think,
just one piece.
yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think, we've talked about, I think, all the things already, right? One of them is be curious. Stay curious about yourself, about the world, about other people,
Mhm.
about opportunities. Whether that means continuing to look for a job, even if you're happy in your job, just to see what other things you might want to do later in your career. Just stay
Well,
curious.
that's good.
And I think a second one is, again, as we said, pay attention to the things that give you joy, right? Whether it's, that you lose time in them, or,
Mhm.
that you get a lot of rewards for them. Just because you're good at it doesn't mean that it's something you want to do, but it's a great place to start when you think about how to grow yourself, and what you can do in the future, or carve a niche for yourself in whatever your role is now or in the future. And I think the last one is, I would say, use your voice. I think we often wait too long to use our voice, or we wait till someone else speaks up first. It's hard to get over that fear, but we should all use our voices to support each other. And it's not about taking up all the last seats at the table. It's about building a longer table so more people can come. And it's great for everyone. It's great for business when we have more women in the room as well. Great for the bottom line, great for everything.
Megan Riley, thank you very much for your wisdom, for your insight, and for your time.
Thank you so much, Baiba.
Thank you. We're recording this on May
Mhm.
13th, 2025. And let me share with those who are listening that after 6 months of testing, we have simplified our Novatore Club offer. And if you're interested, have a look on the website, www.novatore.eu, what we offer and what the next events will be. But in Riga, the most immediate event will be on May the 21st, which will be a leaders' talk on investing in wine with Noble wine director Anna Lokaya, who's also a sommelier in her own right. And I can just give you a teaser that it is well worth the time to listen to how you can invest. I used to be on the board of a bank with another fellow from the UK, who was one of the founders of Swift. And he realized at the end of his career that the best investment he ever made of all the different investments in the portfolio was in wine, and explained why. So it gave the best returns. And this was above and beyond the fact that the wine tasted really good. And I gather there may be some wine tasting. So to the au revoir to those that we will see on May the 21st. Otherwise, until the next time, thank you very much. And then many
Thank you so
thanks to
much.
you here online. Inspiring discussion from Baiba Logina. Thank you. Thank you a lot from Ines and Elsa in capital letters. Thank you. Yeah, but thank you as well. So thanks and goodbye, and have a lovely evening and get well.
Thank you so much.